Hey folks, welcome back to the Dark Horse Podcast Q&A live stream, hour 30th. Sorry for the shenanigans there with the timer in advance of coming back. We have termites, I am told, in our computer. So anyway, that's causing some difficulty, but I think we got it licked. Well, what we did is we got an anteater, and it's going to... All right.
I've always wanted an anteater.
Yeah, actually, it could be kind of an interesting pet. Mm-hmm. Not very smart, but...
Nope. Trundling, mostly.
Yeah, trendy. Is that what you said?
Trundling.
Oh, that too.
Yeah, not so trendy.
No. Well, not yet.
We could start it.
We should.
All right. We're going to start by answering a few questions that were particularly interesting that we missed last time. And actually, there were two from 2 times ago that we missed. One of them about a thread that someone wanted us to go back and look at, but the tweet in question has been deleted, so we can't do that. Apologies to Matt. The next one, though, is from Ryan, sent a Patreon message about guerrilla artwork. He says, as someone still drenched in the filth of our societal subterfuge, what siren of truth can I sound without simultaneously amplifying my perceived ethical shortcomings?
Well, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what that means. I resonate strongly with it, but I don't know what it means.
Yep.
So I would say...
Were you able to find his guerrilla artwork?
No, I was not able to find your guerrilla artwork, and I did look. I looked in several places, including on Patreon, and I couldn't... The interface, I have to say, is kind of cruddy. There's no search that I could
find.
On
Patreon, yeah, it is.
So anyway, hey, Patreon, get your act together. But... Yeah. If you want to send word of what I'm looking for guerrilla artwork-wise, I'd be happy to look at it. In terms of advice, I would say, look... You're the artist, right? That's a really important role. I think what I would do is maybe try not to second guess yourself so much. If you think there's a thread that we need to be paying attention to and you know how to make us see it with guerrilla artwork, then, explore and you'll discover. Mm-hmm. So anyway, more power to you.
All right. Next question from last time. My mother is 75 and I've tried to further explain Unity 2020. She doesn't understand dual governing. She keeps saying people don't work together. Tips on what I can say? She'll be on board if she gets it. It's a cool message.
Yeah, it is a cool message. Look, I think people do work together. I think we're not used to seeing it because we're used to seeing them in zero-sum or negative-sum dynamics, which brings out the worst in people. But if you set up a team and the idea is the success condition looks like can you figure out how to navigate together, then people don't want to find themselves in failure condition. What's more, maybe this is the crux of the matter. We are so far away from policy that works in the interests of most people that doing better than we are doing is actually easy, right? If all you did was sweep away the corrupting influences, then figuring out what would be in the interest of the American public is easy at first. There comes a point at which you've done all of the stuff that makes sense, right? And then you can have disagreements about whether you want to prioritize this value or that value. But until you get to all the basic stuff that needs to just work, then there's no point in arguing, right? Good people who have heard the various inputs to the decision-making process will be able to reach agreement. They may not nail it, right? They may pick a second best healthcare solution rather than the absolute best one. Because it's impossible to know enough to get it exactly right. But the point is, a second best healthcare solution would be about 1 billion times better than the cruddy one we have now. So the point is, let's get to one of the good ones, and then we can argue about whether or not we got it exactly right. And then we can, fight about ideology. But at the moment, the ideology is, hey, let's have some policy that serves us because that's what it's supposed to do.
Next one is a comment. It says, Unity 2020 is politically naive. It would elect a wet centrist and change nothing. As a founding member of the First Against the Wall Club, I say Brett should run or we kick him out of the club.
It's all very kind. Are you trying to get me killed? No, it's not. It's not about centrists. Look, I'm going to say this very clearly because I think this is important. First of all, I have no patience with centrists, and I am very frequently the person challenging the whole idea of centrism because I think it's absurd. However, the center is where we meet. Right? The patriotic center is where we meet to talk about the immediate interests of the nation, right? We can, if you're on a ship and it is sinking because it is taking on water, then the point is you put aside your differences about ship design and you deal with the question of how do we get the water to leave the ship faster than it's coming in, right? That's what the center looks like. It doesn't mean that the people involved in the bilge mechanism don't have an idea about how you might construct a ship that would prevent this from happening in the future. They might. But in the meantime, the ship is taking on water. Everybody grab a bucket and let's deal with the immediate problem, right, by putting aside our ideological differences, which frankly, if we talk about them now, they're going to get us killed.
With struggle sessions emerging in the workplace, this is a huge opportunity for actual liberals to resurrect labor organization to protect workers. I think even many conservatives could be brought on board. I like this idea. I'm not sure how actionable it is. It seems like the resurrection of anything that is traditionally liberal right now is going to be met with some pretty fierce offense from anyone who's observing what's going on in the far pseudo-left and conflating that with the left more broadly.
Yeah, I agree. And I think in some sense what we're talking about is a 2.0 version of something that labor unions tried to do and failed to do largely in this country. Yeah. It's not that they didn't succeed. They accomplished a great deal, but they also became corrupt and sluggish and an obstacle to positive change in many cases. So what we're looking for is something, I mean, look, we offshored the jobs that traditionally go along with labor unions, most of them, right? We've still got, police and teachers and stuff like that. But in general, the manufacturing jobs that were the bulk of the unionized workers are all gone. So in some sense, we have to figure out what to do to protect the people who were once in unionizable jobs, who are now in cruddier jobs. We have to resurrect some sort of useful sector for people to work in, if work is even the right model, or to be productive in might be better. But I think in some sense, all of this stuff, I mean, the problem with Bernie, right? The problem with Bernie is that all of his solutions are backward looking, right? The backward is not where we're going to find the right solution for the 21st century. So,
yeah, although, I mean, to be fair, this question doesn't actually use the word union. Right? It says resurrect. Okay, that appears to be thinking about something that's already been done, but labor organization. And, the idea of protecting the rights of workers against that of the employers is not inherently a backward-facing idea.
Well, I would put it differently. Mm-hmm. I would say the problem is that we have a system in which corruption advances the interests of what once might have been called management against the interests of what once might have been called labor. So that artificial advantage in the political sphere to management is a hazard to everybody. What you really want to do is level the playing field so that everybody's interests as citizens are advanced by the system. That is to say, everybody who's in management is also a citizen, right? Their interests need to get taken care of, but their interests don't get priority. And so I think the point is labor is actually the wrong place for this to exist. It was a place that it could exist by virtue of the fact that it organized people in a way that allowed them to become politically affiliated. But I think in some sense, it was a partial solution to a problem that needs a complete solution.
Yep. Okay, so one remaining question from last time before we get to today's questions. Totally different topic. How do you feel about the legal and ethical hunting of animals in North America? I have a good reason for asking this question, LOL. So we aren't told what the good reason for asking the question is, but the question is, how do we feel about the legal and ethical hunting of animals in North America? Of course, including the word ethical there is maybe, and it's a little bit of a strange addition, but maybe the idea just is hunting that is currently within the bounds of the law and is done in a way that, say, most reasonable people would see as ethical.
Yep.
How do we feel about it?
Well, I think a lot hinges on what's meant by ethical here, because on the one hand, in principle, I have no objection to people hunting. In practice, there are lots of things about the way hunting is done that I think are very objectionable. And the fact that we have destroyed so much habitat for the kinds of creatures that are worth hunting means that this is a very different puzzle, because it's inherently, in some sense, a sport for the few. So,
yeah, although it's also true, where I thought you were going there was because we've because we've managed to clear the habitat largely of the carnivores that would be eating the kinds of things that we tend to hunt, not us, but deer and elk and such, that there is culling that needs to happen because the culling that would be happening by the predators that we've already eradicated isn't happening. And so to some degree, hunters are doing a job that is mandated by our already poor decisions over the last 100 years.
I do agree with that.
Right. I mean, it's also true. I think you did too, but I often had students who were hunters and would sometimes bring meat, gift me meat, gift us meat. And it was wonderful hearing these guys. It was always guys. They often were hunting with their wives or girlfriends or female friends, but I assume that hunting skews very male, and as it happens, all of my students who were hunters with whom I talked about it were male. Talking to them about their stories of being out in nature, of doing regular annual or seasonal hunts, either alone or with groups of friends that they always did. They always did the same. They went to the same place. They had this tradition built around it. Was extraordinary from several perspectives, not just the social aspect, the bonding between human beings that they could look forward to all year and know that it was going to happen again, but also the being out in nature. And it's no secret in most circles that actually people who hunt and fish are some of the most ardent conservationists, because they see what encroaching of development on habitat does to habitat and populations and such. So those two huge benefits, where the action itself is hunting, it's extraordinary. And yes, so long as the hunting is done ethically, meaning a lot of things, I guess. But,
well, I mean, I think the problem is that it means a lot of things, right? Bow hunting, in some sense, is more organic. The advantage over the animal is less. On the other hand, I'm guessing that the likelihood of a wounded animal running off with an arrow in it and suffering and, I don't know, perhaps escaping and suffering.
You think it might be greater with bow hunting than with a gun?
I don't know. I'd be curious. I guess we're about to find out, because I've now just set it live on the internet to thousands of people. But I would say, I think actually a frank conversation needs to happen. Much more troubling than bow hunting of various kinds of deer, elk included, to me, would be things like bear baiting, which was an issue when we lived in Michigan. So people would bait bears, and the bears would come to the bait, and people would shoot them. And I find that completely barbaric. And now I'm told by people no less than Joe Rogan that bears are actually problematic animals that aren't so cool. I disagree with this, but nonetheless, I get that there is something deeper here than a desire to just kill cool stuff. But to be honest, personally, and I'm not sure that I can defend this completely, but I'm more troubled with the killing of creatures that are slower to reproduce and smarter. And, a bear is a highly intelligent animal. And so I am more troubled by its trauma than I am a deer. Probably because deer are built to live shorter lives and be more likely to be predated upon.
It's convenient and maybe no accident that maps very neatly onto predator versus prey, and that the carnivores that are out there that are predators of the more usual things that people hunt, deer and elk and rabbits and such, duck, I guess. Bears don't hunt duck, do they? It's also the meat of carnivores also isn't nearly as tasty or nutritious or safe for us to eat. And so, you don't eat the liver of a carnivore. That's actually really not good for you. And so, eating carnivores are effectively second order herbivores. The closer to herbivore you get, closer to first order herbivore you get, the better the meat is for you and tastier. So just like you shouldn't be eating human meat, you shouldn't be eating bear meat or lion meat or anything. And so if you're not eating it, what are you doing? Why are you killing it?
Yeah, my guess would be that we need to have a rethink of hunting, that involves a resurrection of our appreciation for wilderness and an extension of it so that there's more of it. And then a question about what, to the extent that there's hunting, what should people be hunting with? Should they be firing lead into the wilderness? Probably not. High-powered weapons, is that a good idea? What weapons are most humane? I don't know, but we should be having that conversation, and I'm pretty sure we're not.
Yeah. Okay. First question from the live stream that just ended. This is just a logistical question, really. Is there a way we can document in writing your conversation with the Black Intellectual Roundtable? I see it as possibly one of those brainstorming charts with each individual's response. Thank you both for what you do. I'll support you in any way I can. So this person is asking for some kind of basically a transcript, which we don't have the ability to do at this point. But
no. It's possible that YouTube is going to do that automatically. They're not perfect, but it does a decent job of subtitling, which could easily become a transcript.
Oh.
So I don't know if that setting is on or not. I will say that conversation, lots of people have loved it, which is great. I'm really excited that people dug the conversation and that it went well. I mean, I knew that it would go well, but with that group of people, how could it not?
Yeah.
But I also think that it was like just the tip of the iceberg, that there is so much to be said on many of these topics. And I'm looking forward to continuing those conversations, however it happens. Could be a second roundtable, could be individual conversations with people present on that podcast, or people who see it and weren't present, some of whom were invited and didn't get back to me. But anyway, there's lots of room for that conversation to be extended, and I hope to do it soon.
Yeah. As a psych major, the inculcation of critical theory and postmodernism is troublesome. Will it eventually leave an indelible mark on the industry's reputation? Is there hope for social science? How should we comport ourselves to combat wokeness? It's a lot of questions. To the first one, will it leave an indelible mark on the industry's reputation? Oh, it has. I think that ship has sailed. Is there hope for social science more broadly? I'd say that some subdisciplines in psych and in anthropology are doing better than others. Sociology seems to be largely captured. Cultural anthropology, done. It's tough.
I'd say it this way. We've got lots of disciplines that are in various states of dysfunction. Many of them were founded around the right question, right? Ecology, we found to be not completely a wasteland, but almost a wasteland of quality thinking and work, right?
It's not social science, though.
Oh, I know. Yeah. But my point is, ecology is still a home for many of the most important questions about how creatures interact with each other. So it's sort of how evolution happens in real time, right?
So the metaphor that we would use is evolution is the movie and ecology is the still from the movie that is the way that you have access to inferring what the movie says.
Right. So there is a way to do it right, and maybe it will resurrect itself. And the same goes for many of these social sciences. Now, some of them are just phony fields that were made up, right? Critical theory is a phony nonsense field. It doesn't mean there wasn't a kernel of an idea there, but it's not one that needs vast elaboration. On the other hand, social psychology, for example, is a very important set of questions, fundamentally important, probably necessary to our long-term survival, that we figure out where the pitfalls are so that we can avoid them. And there is historical work that's very important. The Milgram experiment, for example, and the Asch conformity experiment. These are very important discoveries about basically defects in the human heuristics that we use to make sense of the world. That said, all of these disciplines seem to have lost their way. And so don't throw out the questions, right? Throw out the mechanism that allowed these fields to go astray and figure out how to bootstrap a revitalized version of them, or, a new version of them. But it's very important that we don't toss the questions out because we haven't seen productive work on those questions in decades.
I don't know how to read this one. Last video opposition came to your idea, : rent seekers hoarding opportunity cause struggle of people of color and others. What evidence proves this true? Who is hoarding? What is considered rent seeking? Is it dangerous to label a villain class? So I think this is going to be about the Black Intellectuals Roundtable.
Yeah.
Um,
So rent seeking is self-defined. It is the earning of profit through non-productive activity. In other words, the economy is supposed to pay you for producing something useful, but there are mechanisms where you can extract rent, the way a warlord does, for example, right? You can prevent somebody from passing down a road they need to pass down, and so you can effectively extort money from them. And so that's obviously illegal, but there are lots of legal ways to block people's access to things and then charge them for access that you did not add anything to. So the reason that I define rent seekers as the problem is that it's self-defined. I am not saying these people are inherently rent seekers. In fact, what I have said is in many cases you have somebody who's contributed something important that has made them powerful, but then having become powerful, they learn to rent seek. They may not even realize they're doing it. In other words, they may have the experience of, well, I brought important things into the world and I've been handsomely rewarded, therefore I'm productive, right? The answer is no, you're 20% productive and 80% rent seeking, or vice versa. We don't know. It's going to be different in each case. But the point is, it is the rent-seeking behavior that is the enemy. And to the extent that we leave niches open where people learn how to do this thing, we have to shut those down. And that's not to say we have to zero the accounts of people who rent seek. In fact, I think the primary thing is to prevent this behavior from continuing into the future. And the better we can get a match between producing things that are actually useful to the economy, be they services or goods or innovations or whatever they are, that we can get those things to match the remuneration, then the system evolves in the right direction. To the extent that rent seeking is where the money is made, it evolves in a bad direction. So
I would say that we have
no, go ahead.
Finish. I think that we do have a language problem, and I am so ignorant of economics that I do not know where the term rent seeking emerges from and why the term rent is in there and what it has to do historically with the common parlance use of the term rent when people pay rent to a landlord. But the fact that defund the police and cancel rent are two of the really, the primary hashtags right now that are part of this sort of, Maoist revolution in the streets that we're experiencing, cannot be helping when we separately try to talk about rent-seeking behavior, because people who own property, who are charging rent for the privilege of living on that property, that is not productive in the way that generating ideas and solving societal problems is productive. But we are also, when where we talk about rent seeking, we are not saying cancel rent. We're not saying get rid of landlords. We're not saying get rid of private property. And I don't know historically why those are the same words. It's probably the actual same word, like etymologically, but it's going to be confusing to people.
So I think I know the answer to this.
Okay.
So when I'm talking about rent seekers, we're talking about what's called economic rent.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I believe that rent, in the sense of pay your rent, is actually, yes, derived from the same concept. And ultimately, this conversation goes through the Henry Georges of land value taxation fame. So this is a very interesting economic philosophy that basically views everything through a lens of land which is limited, and basically proposes a single fix for all the ills that we see evolve in our economic structure. In fact, I think I am correct in quoting Milton Friedman as describing land value taxation as the least worst tax, something like that.
Least worst?
Yeah, well, he wasn't a fan of taxation, but the point is even Milton Friedman recognized that there was something perverse in the way land functioned. And that, so anyway, I would say I am not completely compelled by the Georges that we have a fix that we can derive from a single shift, a massive shift in the way we collect revenue. But I would say you will be delighted if you are interested in people who have a very interesting perspective to which there is a great deal, and you want a proper argument about a simple solution to a set of complex problems. This is a place to check out. Check out the Georgists. Also, closely related, and actually probably closer to my belief system, are the Pigovians. Pigovian taxes are taxes that take externalities and return them to their proper owners. So to the extent that you are creating pollution that harms people, the point is your tax should return those costs to you. And this is a corrective mechanism that I believe is as close to a single solution to all of our biggest problems as exists. Now, I don't think
while not yet being anything close to operational.
It's very hard to operationalize, yes. But from the point...
And tax is inherently something that you need to be operational.
Right. But let's just say, do it as a thought experiment.
Oh,
if you returned every cost to the person who generated
that's what tax should be.
Well, but then what does the system evolve into if you, if the benefits and costs of your actions all belong to you? Suddenly, all kinds of obnoxious behavior disappears.
Yeah.
Right.
The incentive to game the system gets decreased close to zero.
Yeah.
Yeah. Heard your panel on race talk about families. This is again going to be what went up yesterday, the Black Intellectual Roundtable. If income potential was the determining factor, Asian men would not be least likely to be swiped right on. Black women also least likely. It's about Western beauty standards.
Nope. It's about Western beauty standards, which are a heuristic for something else, something devastating, something diabolical that we are not aware of about ourselves, which is that our genes have a complex set of interests in who we find attractive and for what, right? In other words, there isn't just one thing that people find other people attractive for, and whether you're male or female dictates how many things you are likely to find people attractive for, and the calculus of who you should be attracted to for these different things is distinct. So, if it were Western beauty standards, then Asian men and Asian women, I mean, Asia's a big place, but let's just say you would expect the same valence on the decision making. And in fact, what you find...
No, that's an ungenerous interpretation of the statement.
Maybe I misunderstood the statement.
Western beauty standards does not presume that the West, for any given population, call it Asia, which obviously is not a single population, has the same beauty standards for men and women, has the same expectations of what is beauty and such.
Oh, that's not what I mean. What I mean is that you do find something like sexual racism, less so now, but sexual racism against, let's say, Asian... I
can't believe you just used that phrase.
What?
Sexual racism. Okay.
Well...
Yep.
Sexual selectivity by population against men in the same population where women are fetishized.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, that's an interesting evolutionary phenomenon. And, you want to know how complex this puzzle is? Dig there.
But the fetishization of, for instance, East Asian women.
Yep.
Is that not mostly by European and European descended men? Or is there a fetishization of, this is a crazy conversation, but, do South American men fetishize East Asian women? And if so, is that, again, hearkening back to something that emerges out of a European ethos that describes something underlying?
Oh, I don't think it's arbitrary at all is what I'm getting at.
Right.
I think this is...
I see that that's what you're arguing.
Yeah.
But.
So first of all, we've got a confound, which is it's very hard to sort out what is the organic state of sexual prejudice and what is the result of the fact that, if Asian women are fetishized for some organic reason, then advertisers figure this out and they use it to sell products. And
you get positive feedback.
You get positive feedback.
For sure.
But my point is, as you and I have seen repeatedly in Central and South America, our beauty standards get broadcast by companies into Latin America. And so,
No, it's actually, we could go down a lot of different little rabbit holes here, but one of the really interesting things about spending so much time both in Latin America, where, by the early 90s when we started going there, they were already completely immersed and drenched in Hollywood and Western standards, right? Whereas compare that to Madagascar, where we both spent a lot of time. I spent a bit more time than you did, also in the 90s, which had almost no exposure at all. Like, in fact, if if people asked us at all where we were from, they would assume we were French because America is just not in their map at all of the world. And it was a very, very different place to be. You know, the standards, the expectations, and the beauty standards were very much not in the water and the air there, and so decisions about who was attractive and not were very different.
Yeah, they were very different, but the confound makes it difficult to know what the organic state is and which populations will be responding to which prejudices and which populations have picked up a prejudice because their media is broadcasting it, even if they wouldn't have arrived there themselves.
I guess I just don't think that, you know, I think you respond to the question by saying absolutely not. I don't think that the idea of Western beauty standards is itself wrong. You are just saying, okay, but those standards are based on something that is more fundamental, and I'm not claiming it's moral or nice, but that it is based on something that goes deeper than just it's not arbitrary. And this, you know, this again is the point that we make over and over and over again in this book that we're working on. That, you know, cultural anthropology went off the rails in the mid-20th century, in part with Clifford Geertz, who was arguing in 1960s, 70s, that culture is arbitrary, and that therefore you can do all of this work in cultural anthropology with the assumption that what one culture does could just as easily been what another culture does. And no, that's wrong. That's wrong. Culture evolves just like eye color evolves, and no, it's different mechanisms. Culture is not genetic, but be it genetic or developmental or, revealing itself in anatomy or physiology or behavioral or cultural, it's all evolutionary.
Yeah, it's passed by different hereditary mechanisms, but it's an evolutionary landscape just the same. And we argue subservient to the genetic landscape, which is not a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, the cultural landscape is flexible, which is a great thing. It means we can change stuff in one generation if we want to. But the system we've been handed is one in which culture evolves to serve the genes. And if we want to break that linkage, which we should, we've got our work cut out for us.
Good. I'm an economics undergrad trying to figure out the best way to get my PhD. Brett, I too struggle with school and would love advice on how to succeed in a system that doesn't work well for me. And do you have any recommendations for grad schools that teach in a unique way? Well, to the final question, no, they've all disappeared, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, we, in some ways, even the grad school that worked for me is largely no more. Yeah. So I don't know what to say. I can say...
Before you answer that first one, to the second question, what I used to advise our students, when they were considering going to grad school was, at least within the sciences, I know less about what goes on in economics, that most grad schools now, you apply basically to be working under someone in their lab, working on their questions. So you end up basically with a degree that makes you a glorified lab tech. You know, you've answered someone else's questions that they've posed with their hypotheses, their predictions, their methods. And maybe you get to do a little troubleshooting of the methods along the way. But that's what you get your degree for. That's what you get a PhD for, a doctorate in philosophy for that. That's ridiculous. Whereas at Michigan, at least when we were there, they had, and the negative version of what they had was it was sink or swim. They had a tremendous attrition rate. Half of many of the entering classes of PhD students at Michigan failed out within the first few years, including, I think, our cohort, because you didn't just walk into, you didn't go in and work with someone else who had done the thinking for you. You had to generate your own ideas, your own hypothesis, figure out your own, in our case, field work, site and hypothesis and, everything. And that meant when you got to the end of it, you actually knew how to do science because you'd done science. And compare that to a model in which it's easier, it's more predictable, given that graduate students are effectively really cheap labor for these universities and these PIs, these principal investigators. It's more reliable to make sure that once you let them in, they're going to be around for 5, 7, 9 years, however long it is. But if what you're actually trying to do is generate free-thinking, independent-thinking scientists, you want a school that does not force you to slot into someone else's lab and stay there no matter what. And it's harder and harder to find.
Yeah, Michigan's program was evolutionary in more ways than one. It used selection to find the people who could do the thing and to teach them how to do it. And, I can't fault it entirely. It does work.
Yeah, but it's also less like that now. You know, really, you have to go in under someone, and probably you can switch, but then it's hard to do so, and you sort of have the stigma attached. But to the first part of the question, which was advice on how to succeed if school doesn't like you.
Well, I mean, Eric and I had very different experiences. I found an advisor who saw my work as valuable and was willing to do what was necessary to, in the end, battle all the way through getting my degree. Eric faced something very different, so it's not like I can say, "Oh, do that," because you may not be able to do that. But if you can, I would say finding the people who understand what you're up to and why you should be there and are willing to go to bat for you is important. And I would say make sure that you're doing what you need to do. If you've got to be there because the thing that you really want to do in life requires you to be there, then do so. But don't kid yourself. These systems, they do not produce people in the expectation that there will be jobs. They produce people knowing that there will not be jobs, except for a very few, and they decide who's going to get the jobs. And if you're not their designated person, then you're liable to find that your degree was in large measure a waste. So think carefully about what you're doing.
Next question. Are you concerned about reports of bubonic plague in Colorado and a new virus or illness in the Central Asian states? I think we mentioned the plague in the last one or two of these. I've not seen anything in the last week or so about either of these, but the idea of highly transmissible, potentially deadly disease is obviously not a small one. But with regard to plague, we actually have treatment for plague. And doxycycline is treatment for plague. And it's been the treatment for plague for a long time. Plague was in Madagascar when I was there. I think one of the times you were there with me, and just having a lot of doxy on hand in case you got infected was the treatment. We never ran into it, but we see no evidence that that is evolving away from that drug in terms of the drug's efficacy. So it sounds terrifying, because we all have enough history to know what Europe looked like in the second millennium, but it's that particular thing is probably not a major deal. And I don't remember exactly what the new thing emerging in Central Asia is.
I think it was a new flu strain of a troubling kind, but I haven't seen anything.
H1N1 maybe?
Yeah, I think it was H1N1. Yeah. That's more frightening because, the thing about viruses is they reduce their machinery to almost nothing. And in so doing, they make it hard to fight them because you can't attack their machinery because it's your machinery. They're borrowing it. Yeah. So, I'm more concerned about the virus. On the other hand, on the positive side, we have now across the entire planet had a proper, or at least the beginning of a proper conversation about epidemiology and how to prevent viruses from being spread. Mm-hmm. And so my guess is, even if H1N1 takes hold, that we will have an easier time fending it off.
I don't think I understand this question. What do you think about right to repair in regard to smartphones and their electronic devices? If you think it's important, would you consider talking to Jessa Johnson on your podcast? Lots of love from Poland.
I think
I don't know what it means.
Mike,
this is like iFixit is sort of the leader in right to repair type stuff. You probably know.
It's the right to fix your phone rather than have to get a new one.
Oh, okay. So that was Zach off camera. Reminding us.
Obviously, in a general sense, we would be in favor of this. I like the ethos that if you can't open it, you don't own it. And in lots of ways, we don't really own our phones. We rent our phones and they parasitize us, and it's not a fair relationship and it's not symmetrical. And we see this in lots of things that aren't inherently phone based. We obviously are broadcasting this on YouTube, and YouTube makes decisions about whether the content we are putting out is suitable for its advertisers. You know what they didn't like?
The Black Intellectual Roundtable.
The Black Intellectual
Roundtable. They soft monetized that because, offensive?
I don't
something
know. There's
dangerous.
Dangerous, I would think.
Dangerous,
Yes,
yes.
I know. So anyway, the algorithm delivers
But they have unsoft demonetized that since you.
I think so. Although I've seen them wobble in the past.
Yeah.
My guess is what goes on is an algorithm looks at the language or something, and if you're in territory that it finds at all sensitive, it punishes you for making the content, which is insane, right? Because this is exactly the content you want in order to make the world less dangerous. So anyway, I am going to policy proposal. This is not affiliated with Unity 2020. I think no matter what happens there, we have to do this other thing, which is artificial intelligence. That's a category we're shooting for. What we've got is artificial stupidity. So Google, that's what you've achieved. And thank you for it, I guess. But could you cut it out?
Mhm.
Could you just leave us alone? Could you trust us?
Yeah.
We put out good stuff. Go through the channel. Look at it. Is
Artificial
any of it really
stupidity.
bad? No. So trust us.
Artificial stupidity, the acronym for which is ASS. Yes.
We need another S somehow.
Somehow.
Yeah.
Artificial stupidity somehow. Okay. Hi, both. If you are not already familiar, check out Jackson Brown's I Am a Patriot and Lives in the Balance. Both illustrate these times powerfully. I'm certain that he would lend them to Unity 2020, love from the UK. Interesting.
Nice. Can you
Okay.
talk to Billy Bragg for us? Because he's gone nuts.
We're at about 42 minutes.
Okay. I will do 4 more of these. I was trying to get through all the orange ones, the $20 questions. I probably won't quite get through all of them, though. Sorry, guys. My child's uneducated, barely literate mother. Start again. Okay. My child's uneducated, barely literate mother is
What are we getting dragged into?
I don't know yet. I haven't read this one yet. I just ranked them. I didn't read them. My child's uneducated, barely literate mother is anti-school, anti-vaxxer, conspiracy theorist too. By the way, I want her educated because education was robbed from me and I will never get my head above water as a result. You seem pro anti-school. Please advise.
Oh, yeah. Here's the thing. There's that cruddy thing that we call school, and then there's what school should be.
Yeah.
And here's the key thing, right? Civilization is squandering human potential, which is despicable, right? A human is capable of the most marvelous feats of compassion and insight and innovation, and yet we take this spectacular creature and we set it to the most mundane garbage, right? We just waste everybody's time, like not just most of it, all of it. We waste entire lives. We cripple people by exposing them to cruddy lessons that don't cause them to be able to be more capable as adults. It causes them to be only capable of cog-like behavior. So that's what school is. School should be the thing that figures out what the limits of human capacity are. We should be moving in that direction. We should be discovering what school looks like. And so if you hear us ranting and railing against school, it's not because we don't value what should be in that category. It's that we resent the amount of squandering of human potential that actually happens, which is immense.
Yeah. It's true that school is not universal in humans, but learning is. And so one of the things that we speak to is the idea that we have been handed a false equivalency in which we are basically told, don't you want your children to learn? Well, then they have to do it in school because where else could they possibly learn? And that's school and learning aren't the same thing. That said, school done well is frankly what we were doing. We were professional educators for 15 years, never having expected to go into that, right? And to this, this book that I read from the last hour, this Weapons of Mass Instruction, the subtitle is School Teachers' Journey Through the Dark World of Compulsory Schooling. So again, this author, who again rants and raves about the failures of school, himself also dedicated himself for at least twice as long, maybe more than we did, to educating minds younger than his, while still recognizing exactly where the failings in the system were. So it's tough because compulsory schooling is pretty broken, but it's extremely difficult to do anything else. Some of our most remarkable and unexpected and brilliant students had been homeschooled or unschooled at Evergreen, but that takes something. That takes a lot, actually, on the part of the family and the parents and the kid. And most families just can't manage that, either of those things.
So every time we say this is what we were doing, I think it is important to say there were two things necessary for us to do what we were doing.
Yeah.
One was complete freedom to do whatever we needed to do. That freedom was a disaster in other parts of the college because it let people do nothing, right? So the jobs were too easy to get. They weren't easy to get, but they were too easy to get. So we brought in lots of people who were lackluster, and then we couldn't get rid of them. There was no standard by which they could be judged. And so Evergreen accumulated cruddy teachers.
Mhm.
However, if you were there and for your own reasons, you were motivated to try to figure out how best to educate people, nobody could stop you, right? There was no compulsory education inside of the structure. You could design your own courses and you could teach them, and you had your students' attention full time. So you had an incredible palette on which to paint. And so for those of us like you and me, the small number who were just absolutely driven to figure out what you could teach given complete freedom, it was great. And these
And
two
it
things
also-
can be separated.
But it worked much more effectively for older. So not only were we teaching college, not K-12, but also many of our students were older than traditional age. At Evergreen across the board, I think the average age of the students was 25 or so, and we often had students our age or older. And so we had a palette that we could share with our students and paint onto a canvas that was open, as opposed to the kind of paint by numbers, top down authoritarian approach that most modern compulsory schooling engages in. And part of that, a little bit of that probably has to happen because you do need to know how to write. And you're not going to learn how to write by just hanging out in the forest. That's not where you're going to learn how to write. But the sort of No Child Left Behind and all of its bastard children and the standardized testing and the amount of time taken up in the curriculum to teaching to and then the follow on after all the standardized tests that are now taking up so much time of children is rendering teachers unable to do the kind of work that even the best of them, that the best of them would be able to do had they a bit more freedom to actually do their jobs.
Yeah. Also, as great as it is to do that job at the level of college, it is really important that we start doing the job for the youngest kids. Because
100%.
the longer you wait, the harder it is to resurrect an awake mind.
Yeah. Okay, this question is about biology. #biology. Is invasive species, quote, the religion of biology, in that to question the idea is heresy and results in excommunication? It appears to the question asker, that invasive species are opportunistic species and a point in time is preferred.
Yeah.
So there's something to this.
Sort of, kinda.
Yeah.
Sort of, kinda. Let's put it this way. Take people out of the equation. You've got some sort of mechanism that produces an equilibrium of species in each habitat, right? So you've got a certain amount of species migration, where a species that wasn't in a habitat finds its way into a habitat. You've got a certain amount of emergence of new species through speciation. And these things tend to equilibrate. Every so often, something will disperse over a very long distance. I've talked about the fact that the only mammal that is natively on land in Hawaii is a bat. Okay. At some point, a bat that wasn't in Hawaii got blown off course, maybe a pregnant bat, or maybe it was a couple bats that were flying together that got blown there and it happened to be a male and a female. Who knows? But somehow, a bat that wasn't in Hawaii ended up there. Is that natural? Of course. Is it invasive? I wouldn't call it that. It's a natural process. So when we say invasive, what we really mean are human transported creatures, where we have solved a biological problem by transporting a creature over a gap it would not have crossed, and that has resulted in it not having to solve that problem, and therefore sometimes being competitively superior and driving out species that are native. So if what you oppose is the human transportation of creatures and therefore solving a problem that they were evolutionarily unable to solve on their own, then this all makes sense. So invasive doesn't mean migrant. It means human-driven invasive, and human-driven invasives are often competitively superior because they are not hamstrung by the need to disperse into the habitat.
Well, and they often don't have competitors or predators or parasites within their new habitat that have millions of years of coevolution with them.
Yep.
So they are freed from any of the constraints of the native organisms, which they are most closely aligned with niche-wise. So they can move into someone else's niche and not suffer the same kind of parasites, pathogens, competitors, predators as the native organisms do, and thus have a better chance of taking over.
So the ultimate thing here is if you take human transportation of creatures out of the equation, you will get high diversity. If humans are allowed to transport things willy-nilly because we decide invasion is just another natural process, you will drive diversity through the floor. And the reason is because you will find the same superior competitors everywhere. And if you don't believe us, look at eucalyptus.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely wrecking South America.
In Portland, English ivy.
English ivy here.
Yep.
Eucalyptus everywhere.
Zach is now laughing because he knows this is one of the banes of my existence.
Yes.
I go out every week and tear out as much of the English ivy as I can, not because when I'm in England I hate ivy, but it has no business here and it destroys the huckleberries and the salal and the sword ferns and the vine maples and everything else that would make a beautiful and productive forest, which when you take out the ivy, you get back the creepers and the wrens and the woodpeckers and everything else as well, and that's just the birds.
Yep.
But English ivy comes in and you end up with a monocrop as opposed to an actual rich, diverse ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Next, so questions now from this live stream. Have you read the critiques of Friars, an empirical analysis of racial differences, cited by Harris? They are weak, but it might be useful to discuss for those who are unable to parse their weakness. I'm not aware of this. Text.
I don't know by that name. By Harris.
Cited
Sam?
by Harris.
Cited by.
I don't know. It just says Harris.
Okay, not sure.
Yep. Brett, your First Against the Wall club needs a better name. I suggest the 300, referring to the 300 Spartans of Thermopylae.
Okay, we will take that under advisement. We will perhaps put it to a vote at the next meeting of the First Against the Wall club if we have not been put against the wall.
Pushback from both me and your brother, which it's somewhat rare that it's the two of us opposing an idea in very much the same words independently.
No, you're always both opposing, but you don't agree with each other very frequently about the direction of opposition. But in this case, you do seem to be aligned that is an appalling designation, which makes me pretty sure it's right.
Okay,
and,
fair enough.
I'm determined to win you both over.
Not the 300 then. Thermopylae, it's a good word.
Thermopylae is a great word.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Next question. We are white. 8-year-old girl, 6-year-old boy. Oh my God. I don't know what this question means. We are white. 8-year-old girl, 6-year-old boy, anti-racism, parentheses, full doctrine. Greater than DEI, meaning diversity, equity, and inclusion, greater than their K-12 school. Is this legal? This discriminates at its core and calls us racists. I suspect there's something going on at the school with regard to the diversity, equity, and inclusion movement, but I can't translate. I know you were limited by letters here, so I'm not faulting the person who wrote the question, but I can't translate it enough to say.
I don't get it.
Yeah. Sorry. Certain evils involve a most of us aren't consensus, yes, as an intellectual trade-off, making zero-day arguments abundant dry fuel.
Zero-day exploits.
I'm concerned that a pedophile fragility illustration could escape the rhetorical lab at this point.
Hold on. What? People have tried to put more and more into a single question.
So certain evils, certain evils involve a most of us aren't consensus as an intellectual trade-off.
Okay.
Yeah. So like hashtag not all men.
Yeah.
Not all white people, whatever. True enough. Making zero-day arguments abundant dry fuel. So what's the zero-day?
Well, zero-day exploit would be something that works because nobody sees it coming. That once they've encountered it, they learn to fend it off.
Okay. And then I'm concerned that a pedophile fragility illustration, which is something we read last time, it was a question that came in as a
way. It was an analogy to prove the falsity of the white fragility argument. Yeah.
I'm concerned that the pedophile fragility illustration could escape the rhetorical lab at this point.
Oh, yeah.
But
I think the point is that there is no bar to this argument. The reducto ad absurdum is going to be just a reducto ad. My Latin is about to fail me. But the argument that was at one time useful to point out the absurdity of a position is going to become a position which we've seen a dozen times.
Yeah,
I mean,
this is true.
100 times.
This is true.
Sex is not a binary.
Yeah.
No,
and actually, I mean, there are some really horrifying and creepy pedophilia justifying claims already beginning to move around the web.
Well, I mean, what we see in the, the drag kids stuff, like what the heck is this?
Yeah.
Right, so
reading to, pre-K kids in library reading hours, sexualized. Oh, yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Okay. Next up. Do you think that apprenticeship or rites of passage should become more common in the West, as a lot of men, specifically, seem to lack guidance? Well, I would say a lot of men and women seem to lack guidance, that rites of passage have been not totally ubiquitous in every human culture that has been looked at, but nearly so.
Mm-hmm.
It is I think actually, so this is a terrific book, a guy named, I think it's David, last name Brown, called Human Universals, in which he basically tries to assess what are, in fact, some of the many traits that show up in every single culture that has been looked at. And while he says he's not quite sure that rites of passage are universal, I think when I look carefully at the data he's using, I would say actually, while say, death ritual isn't totally universal, marriage ritual isn't totally, birth ritual, if you go across all the kinds of rituals, coming of age being the one that is being alluded to here, I think every culture does have some kind of ritual for sure, but then rites of passage, almost all of them do. We lost something real, and graduation from high school, and for many people going to college and graduating from college used to be, for a couple of decades anyway, a kind of rite of passage, but it's not that anymore, because it doesn't have very much value anymore.
The thing is, it's not. It slots in, but it has none of the useful characteristics. So in any case, we do make exactly this argument in our book, that rites of passage are fundamental, that their loss breaks an important phenomenon, and that something needs to take its place. And it's a perfect Chesterton's fence situation where you may not be able to peg exactly what the rite of passage does, and you may say it's archaic, but if you eliminate it, then you discover that, oh, hey, why are there no adults?
Yeah.
Gee, I wonder
why.
I wonder why there are no adults.
And apprenticeship, absolutely. I mean, there are some kinds of work that really just mandate apprenticeship, and we're losing it nearly across the board. And then you might argue that even that kind of work that doesn't necessarily require apprenticeship might benefit from it, both from the perspective of the master and the apprentice.
Yeah, it's great for some things. Carpentry, for example, not so good for sorcerers. It can cause a lot of trouble.
Yeah. Brooms get out of hand.
Exactly. All too easily.
Hey, Zach, I'm hearing a lot of cat bell. You wanna let the cat in so he stops going operatic on us? Okay. Where were we? Here we go. Want to hear your ideas on California. I just scrolled way too far. There we go. Want to hear your ideas on California Prop 16, in which civil rights will be on the ballot in November and can be struck down to commit positive discrimination to increase Black and Latino college admissions. Yeah, we talked about this a little bit a few episodes back. I don't think we identified it by the name.
Yep.
But Prop 16 on the California ballot.
So, I mean, it should be pretty clear to people who follow us what we're likely to think about this, which is that this is, it's the very leading edge of something that is about to overwhelm us, which is that these positive discrimination, which is, of course, not positive in any useful sense of that term, is going to be installed into every system, both formally and informally, and civilization will come apart as a result. So, bad, really as bad as could be. And, will that one initiative be the thing that heralds the end of Western civilization? Probably not, but it does tell you what's coming down the pike.
Okay, I'm reading someone else's assessment here. Epstein and Maxwell ran a Mossad-backed blackmail ring on global elites. The leaders of both parties are implicated in credible sexual assault allegations with contemporaneous evidence. Please take time to review Whitney Webb's investigative journalism.
Okay.
I don't know anything about Mossad involvement.
Yeah, I don't either.
Yeah.
But Eric has talked extensively about what might account for the Epstein phenomenon, and
Yeah.
it's a possibility.
This is Fairfax, everyone. Do consumer-grade UV blacklights kill COVID? And if so, should we make cosmic bowling the new national pastime?
Yes,
Yes.
and definitely yes.
Yes, for sure.
Yes, I believe they do. There is a
Yeah,
fair amount of
I-
work now
yeah.
on different types of UV and how effective they are. But I think even the ones that are least effective are still effective enough to be useful. So yes to the bowling, and dress
Cosmic
accordingly.
bowling. Dress accordingly? Oh, what do we dress?
I
What
think
do
you
we wear?
wear as much white as possible,
Uh,
because then it
So that
picks
you-
up the black light.
and you don't end up with a bowling ball through you.
No, it's not a safety thing. It's a cool thing.
I see. Yeah. Safety third, as I once said to
Safety
students
third,
before nothing
exactly.
bad happened, actually. So,
Things you could regret saying in court.
yes. It was a day on which no one almost died. So
Oh,
I
man,
was.
those are good days.
It worked out. Yeah. You guys don't think consciousness, you guys don't think conscious awareness is fundamental, but without it, nothing would matter. Do you really think a universe in which nothing matters could spontaneously produce the capacity to matter? I think you've completely misunderstood our position. It's fundamental. Oh, okay. So it depends on what you mean by fundamental. So there's a couple of different meanings of the word fundamental here.
Yes, and the word matter.
Humans wouldn't be humans without consciousness. But the idea that consciousness is fundamental and that it came before matter, that it's primary, is the thing that we say no.
Yeah.
That's panpsychism, and no, that doesn't work. That doesn't make sense.
Or even just before creatures would be absurd.
Yeah.
So I think you have a couple of what Daniel Dennett calls deepities in here, where
I think this actually may be tongue in cheek. This question.
somebody's messing with us.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well,
It's
Good
Gumby
job.
the Green who's asked questions for it. Do you really think a universe in which nothing? So I think he's exactly playing with fundamental and matter here,
all right. Well, he fooled
so.
me.
and me too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Well,
I
played.
interrupted though. Why don't you answer it in good faith?
I
or
was
something?
going to argue that
Yeah.
I think there are two deepities in that statement. A deepity being a term that shifts meaning inside of a claim that results in a false paradox. So what is the famous example?
Yeah, I can't remember.
I don't know. Has to do with love being just a word, and the idea is that love is actually a phenomenon, but it's also a word. And
Yeah.
so, if you slide between those two meanings, you can create logical problems.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I think matter and matter
Mm-hmm.
is playing that role
Yeah,
here.
yeah, I agree. And fundamental too. It's just not sliding actively within this framing. Does the fact that there are less Y chromosomes than men explain behaviors like group rape, where Y has the probability to be passed even if without the rest of the genome? Is group rape more probable if the Y is shared within the group? This is asked by a woman, incidentally, which at least changes my sort of willingness to
the
engage a
last
little
part
bit.
of the question is possible,
Yeah,
but
never thought of it before.
it would
Yeah.
have to be triggered by the Y chromosome carrying sequences that would function in their own interest,
Mm-hmm.
which is unlikely given the nature of Y chromosomes that we actually find. In other words, it may be why the Y chromosomes have been genetically largely shut down.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, it's not impossible that such a thing could evolve, although I guess the question is why is the if the Y chromosome is shared, then it doesn't really have an interest in more than one male participating in the mating unless by the way, in order for this to be an acceptable thing for us to be discussing, I think we have to be discussing insects or something like that.
Okay.
Um,
Which, of course, don't have
yeah, right. It can't be-
chromosomal sex determination.
Yeah.
You do voles.
All right. Voles it is.
Mhm.
Sorry, voles. If there are any voles watching, we apologize.
I'm not apologizing to voles.
It must be late in the podcast. We've gotten to whether or not we're apologizing to voles.
Yeah.
So the question is, what's the advantage to the chromosome of getting more than one male involved? It's not obvious to me that there is one.
Yeah.
But could such a thing emerge evolutionarily? Yes, if there was a sequence carried on the Y chromosome that could advance its own interest in this way. There are, of course, lots of other systems that have the same nature but not the same mechanism of action, like driving genetic elements that cause themselves to be in a larger fraction of gametes than they would be in normally, sometimes by killing off some fraction of gametes so that the fertilizing gamete always carries the element. This comes at a fitness cost to the individual, but it advances the interest of the element in question. So those things exist, and I think that's kind of the model for what you're looking for here.
Yeah.
So anyway, interesting question.
Next.
We're at about an hour and 5 minutes.
Okay, let's do a few more. Someone is saying, again, as we talked about at the end of the last live stream, Barry Weiss resigned from the New York Times because it was a hostile work environment owing to political orthodoxy. Yeah, that's
Yep.
pretty much it. Next question.
Well, actually, as long as we're on that topic,
Yeah.
here's the hostile work environment. That's illegal. The employer has an obligation to correct that. Now, here's the question. Would a court be able to hear that argument? A court is certainly supposed to hear that argument, but at the moment, it might be impossible to get a court to give her a judgment that there was a hostile work environment. And, we found the rudiments of this as we were fixing to sue the state for allowing Evergreen to be a hostile work environment. And the problem was, in the courts, there was already this woke ideology that,
Yep.
made them more interested in painting us as racists than in engaging the fact that they actually had people roving a campus with baseball bats, hunting professors. I mean, come on.
Yep.
So it's a question.
Next question in the same vein. Why do human beings enjoy the sound of birdsong? Now, I love this question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this one let's put it this way. The first order answer is easy. We look for proxies for productivity. Why do you find a particular valley beautiful and another one inhospitable? That's going to tend to correlate to how likely you are to be able to find things that your ancestors might have eaten there, or to grow things that your ancestors might have grown there. So you can imagine that we could have all kinds of creatures function as like an omen that says, yes, this is the spot. And the yes, this is the spot creature is just one that tends to be seen in places that are good and doesn't tend to be seen in places that are bad.
So this is probably wrong. But one thing that occurs to me is that one of the leading hypotheses for why primates experienced an adaptive radiation when they did, which is, the earliest primates existed before the KT boundary, before Chicxulub hit what's now the Yucatan. It's about 66 million years ago, but that we really expanded quite a bit afterwards, and that this was the expansion was, yes, about the opening of niches as all the non-avian dinosaurs were now out of the way. But one of the hypotheses also has to do with the coevolution of angiosperms, of flowering plants. And because primates are largely like songbirds, frugivores, or many songbirds are pollinators as well. But frugivores or insectivores, the insects themselves being effectively
Radiated
frugivores.
in response to...
Yeah. So if all of these basically, if primates were in part co-evolving along with angiosperms of flowering plants, I suspect, although I know much less about how we've mapped songbird evolution. So songbirds is a real group. It's passerines. It's a real evolutionary group. I suspect that they also experienced an adaptive radiation with angiosperms of flowering plants, because how could they not? They're mostly eating the same stuff. So it's possibly that primates and songbirds are both sort of mapped on to the same moment in plant evolution, and that if we were all adaptively radiating at the same time, we would have come to basically have our aesthetic at a most fundamental level be that with whom we were evolving at the same time, although not exactly co-evolving, because we aren't dependent on songbirds for the most part. They aren't big enough for us to be eating them, and they're mostly birds and mammals are eating different seeds, have different toxins, different preferences. But it could have been a sort of emerging life at the same time, and as such a shared vision of beauty.
Yep. I mean, there was a lot in that explanation. I like it.
Seems like I said, it's probably wrong because it hinges on too much at some level, but
I'm cautiously betting in favor of it.
All right.
And I would say that you really, at the end, it's just basically then songbirds are a proxy for a productive angiosperm ecosystem in which plants are paying to have their seeds distributed.
Yeah.
And that's likely to be a good place for people.
Yeah. I love that question. More questions like that.
Yeah, that's a good one.
What role has postmodernist thinking played in the recent protests and riots? Is this school of thought plus social media what drives behavior to engage with only the periphery of info part of the root cause? That went a little off the rails at the end. But many of our most recent live streams have been to this question, and most of the people on the street wouldn't be able to name a postmodernist thinker, probably. Some of them could because they've been schooled in it. By schooled, I use the word schooled intentionally. But the fact that many people couldn't tell you about Foucault or Derrida or Marcuse or whoever doesn't mean that it's not emerging from this critical theories, which is a direct outgrowth of postmodernism.
Yeah. I think our friends
Helen Pluckrose and Jim
Peter
Lindsay.
Boghossian and Jim Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose.
Well, Helen Pluckrose and Jim Lindsay specifically have a book out in August of this year that's already available for pre-order. We've got a copy on the way to us right now, so I've not read it yet, but I'm certain it's excellent. Called Cynical Theories, in which they deconstruct the deconstructionists, and I believe go after specifically, the claims of racism and sexism and transphobia and ableism and fat phobia and all of these things, by going back to the so-called primary literature and pointing out the origins of these things.
Yes.
Yeah.
What I was going to say was that they have a term that they use, which is I think it's functional postmoderns. And
I don't think I've heard that.
The idea being that you don't need to know that you're operating a postmodern philosophy in order to operate one. And so the fact that they don't know Derrida is immaterial.
Mm-hmm. Do you need a software engineer with 15 plus years of experience to build cloud infrastructure, Docker, streaming, etc.? I want to contribute.
We might well.
Maybe?
Yeah.
So Zach, you want to, it's 51. How does Unity 2020 hope to deal with Congress? Don't you think they will stonewall you, especially since both sides will hate you? Do you have any plans to put up candidates for Congress? That last question is one we haven't heard before. So you have said we're not going to go into details because we don't want them to see us coming at some level.
Let's put it this way. We can talk about the Congress issue. First of all, there are a lot of, in every place in this system, you have people who are going to operate according to the corrupt modality of the system because, frankly, it's the smart thing to do, right? You can starve yourself by not participating. You can be a jerk and you can be corrupt no matter what, or you can function according to the rules of the system as you find them and hope for better rules. And so some fraction of the Congress is going to be people who would love to be freed. But here's the thing. For Unity 2020 to work, we need a groundswell sufficient to draft these candidates. That groundswell is a credible threat against people who stonewall in the Congress. In other words, the reason that this can succeed is that people are livid at how they are being treated by their government. To the extent that you have people in Congress who find themselves faced with a presidential team that has been elected specifically to drain the swamp, there's an incentive to declare yourself not of the swamp, to take a pledge perhaps that would prevent you from participating in swamp-like behavior. And I believe there are many ways that this could function. So it's not It's not a small issue, but let's just say the groundswell that tells the apparatus that we are completely sick of being treated this way and being parasitized is the key, not only to changing the people in the White House, but to changing the Congress.
Okay, we're going to quickly go through these 6.
Okay.
Knowing that we're going well beyond our hour. John mentioned a change in black communities between 1960 and 1980. I don't know if this is probably McWhorter rather than Wood Jr.
I believe so, but I need to hear more before.
Okay. So, John, this is in reference to the Black Intellectuals Roundtable, which you moderated, that was posted on this channel yesterday. John mentioned, and had 2 of the men named John McWhorter and John Wood Jr. John mentioned a change in black communities between 1960 and 80. Could this be linked to the change in black music? From the love and peace values of Motown to violence, money, and objectifying women in rap, especially for young black men?
Yes and no.
That is very interesting.
My guess is the music is a symptom, and that in effect what you have is a pattern in which it is clear that the hoped-for trajectory has been abandoned, right? That something is now in the way, right? So you had the hopeful progress of the civil rights movement, and then you have something get derailed. And I guess the point is, people who find that a system is no longer responsive to their needs become cynical about it and rebellious against it, and they generate their own culture that no longer participates. So, I don't want to claim to know more about it than I do, but I do think you have to ask yourself the question, just the shift in music over the same period of time doesn't tell you whether that is a symptom of the same phenomenon or whether it is causal. And my guess is it isn't causal, that the nature of music in human beings is that it's going to track our mindsets rather than drive them.
Just to get back to the question, they do say linked. So that doesn't, although I read it as you did, as could it be causal? The idea of linkage, I think, is actually almost certain now that you say it. I mean, it does match the greater cultural change, and so probably there's interplay back and forth, but more likely the music is effect.
There is another factor though that we have to cover, which is that the Motown era was accompanied by some predatory business practices against black artists in the extreme. So lots of black artists who produced really important music and had a powerful influence were just shut out of the benefits of what they had created. And the music itself was also altered by the fact that in some sense, part of what it did was appeal to black audiences, but part of what it did was appeal to white audiences too. And so there's a lot of stuff that might not have been organically produced in the black community that was nonetheless saleable. And so there's kind of a presentation of black culture that was more palatable to white culture. And to the extent that black artists rightly got more powerful, got more credit, got more of the money from the music they produced, they also became independent of that structure. And so I don't know how all those things fit together, but my guess is that what we are seeing partly is constraint in the Motown era, and that the removal of some of that constraint resulted in a very different presentation.
Okay, 5 more. Dear Heather and Brett, I would love to see a list of books you recommend. You two are great. I do have on my Patreon at the $17 tier various lists of recommended books. I've got a list of science books I recommend. I just put up some science fiction. And every time I walk by our bookshelves that you installed in our house when we moved here, having lost our office space and our sort of extensive libraries when we left Evergreen, I think I love being able to have the books that we have, and wish we had even more space for more of them. Not a thought you necessarily often experience, but yeah, I do have some up, some such lists up. Next question. What are your thoughts on the Letter on Justice and Open Debate, published July 7th in Harper's? Have either of you thought about signing it?
We were not asked to sign it. I would not have signed it. Would you have signed it?
I don't think so, but it's hard to know. It's easy to say probably not, but
I think we should cover this. I thought we might get to it today, and we didn't. But I must say,
down for next time.
I am very troubled by that letter. Not so much for what it does say, but how it divides people who naturally are not to be divided, must not be divided, and anyway. So I found the letter very troubling. That said, we have a tremendous number of friends on that list who signed that letter. And so they, in some sense, have been dragged into something, I think. My guess is they would have the same complaints about it that we would. So let's cover it more in detail next time.
All right. And I'm back. This is from someone who I think we ended with last time with regard to the White Fragility Book Club, and we had said we're not sure what kind of what your person of color status is, and therefore what you might be able to do if you are walking into a White Fragility Book Club with mostly middle class white women. It's just, I think, what I remember you saying. The rest of the people were, you say, hello again. I'm mixed Latino and Persian with Marxist immigrant parents. I'm a male, cultural Christian, and libertarian, and the first person with my last name to be a citizen and get a degree. Love. Thank you.
Wow.
That's awesome. And I would be curious to know how that went, how that book club went, if you did it. Penultimate question here, just a comment. Reach out to biologists in Alaska. It's really complicated. Bear and wolf seasons are managed around moose, etc.
Okay. I'm prepared to be wrong about bears, but I just have a soft spot in my heart for them.
Yeah, you do. Okay, final question for today. Hi, Heather and Brett. Have you considered having Michael Schellenberger on the podcast? He shares your concerns about the climate crises, but comes to different conclusions about nuclear power.
He comes to different conclusions about a lot of things. And I must say, I have occasionally seen Michael Schellenberger say things that I agree with, but I am very frequently alarmed by the perspective that he arrives at. So it's not that I wouldn't consider talking to him. I would, but I would say to those of you who are watching Michael, proceed with caution. Where he talks about nuclear power, I feel he is clearly dead wrong and dangerously so. And I suspect a hidden agenda that has something to do with perverse incentives.
You want to end there, like I said, or do you want to end not on Schellenberger?
No, that's fine. We can end on Schellenberger.
Okay. That's it then.
That's it. Well,
so we're ending on Schellenberger.
You have survived another Dark Horse live stream Q&A with Brett and Heather.
We'll be back on, what is today? Today is Tuesday.
Today is Tuesday.
We will be back on Saturday.
We're gonna be back on Saturday. I'm gonna get out
Aren't
of this. Yes. Of course.
But you're not going to be sitting there the whole time in the interim.
I'm going to get out of this chair really soon. I might even get on a bicycle.
Nice.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for joining us. We will see you next time.